The galaxy was burning, and nobody knew how to stop it. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had kept peace among the stars. Hundreds of different alien species lived together, traded with each other, and rarely fought wars. When they did fight, they followed rules. War was supposed to be honorable. Soldiers announced themselves before attacking. They never shot retreating enemies. They treated prisoners with respect. These rules had worked for thousands of years. Then the Kralith came. Nobody knew where they came from. They just appeared one day at the edge of the galaxy, moving from world to world like locusts. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to trade. They just wanted to consume everything in their path. Plants, animals, buildings, even the soil itself. Everything became food for their massive hive structures. The Council sent their best warriors to stop them. These soldiers were brave and well-trained. They had energy weapons that could burn through steel. They had armor that could stop bullets. They knew every combat technique developed over 10,000 years of civilization, but they kept losing. The problem was simple. The Council warriors fought with honor. The Kraith did not. While Council soldiers announced their attacks and gave warnings, the Kralith attacked from everywhere at once. While Council soldiers tried to minimize casualties, the Kraith threw endless waves of creatures forward, without caring how many died. While Council soldiers followed rules about proper warfare, the Kralith had no rules at all. After 6 months of fighting, the Council had lost 17 colony worlds. Billions of civilians had been evacuated or killed. The Kralith kept pushing forward, and nothing seemed to slow them down. Ambassador Velron stood in the council chambers, his crystal body reflecting the worried faces around him. He was one of the oldest members of the council, and in all his years, he had never felt this kind of fear. "We need a new strategy," he said to the assembled leaders. "Our traditional methods are not working." "What do you suggest?" asked the council chairman. "We have already deployed our finest warriors. We have used our best weapons. What else can we do?" Velron pulled up a holographic display. It showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. "Earth," he said. "A primitive world we discovered a century ago. The inhabitants have not achieved faster than light travel. They have barely explored their own solar system. By our standards, they are barbaric. Then why are we looking at them?" Another council member asked. "Because they know how to fight," Velron replied. He changed the display to show images from Earth's history. Battles, wars, conflicts spanning thousands of years. These humans have been fighting each other since they learned to walk upright. They have developed warfare into an art form. Not an honorable art, but an effective one. The images showed tanks rolling across fields, aircraft dropping bombs, soldiers moving through ruins. It was brutal and ugly. Nothing like the clean warfare the council practiced. "They fight without honor," someone protested. Yes, Velron agreed. "And that is exactly what we need." The debate lasted for 3 days. Many council members were horrified at the idea of bringing such violent creatures into their civilized war. Others argued that they had no choice. The Kralith would not stop. If the council did not try something different, they would eventually lose everything. Finally, they voted. By a narrow margin, the council approved contact with Earth. Velron took a ship to the small blue planet, traveling for 3 months to reach it. He landed in a city called Geneva, where Earth's governments had gathered to meet him. The humans were strange to look at. They were small compared to most galactic species, with soft skin and no natural armor. They looked fragile. But when Velron looked into their eyes, he saw something that made him reconsider. These were the eyes of predators, of survivors, of beings who had clawed their way to the top of their world's food chain. President Catherine Walsh sat across from him, flanked by military officers. She was an older woman with gray hair and a stern expression. "You came a long way to talk to us, Ambassador. What do you want?" Velron explained the situation. The Kralith, the losing war, the desperate need for soldiers who could fight without following the Council's restrictive rules. He offered technology in exchange. Medical advances, clean energy, protection from future threats. Catherine listened without interrupting. When Velron finished, she turned to the man beside her. General Hayes, what do you think? General Marcus Hayes was a career soldier with 3 decades of military experience. He had fought in half a dozen wars and seen things that still gave him nightmares. He studied the holographic images of the Kralith that Velrune had provided. How many do you need? Hayes asked. 5,000 soldiers for the first deployment, Velrune replied. Hayes nodded slowly. We can do that. But I need to be clear about something. If we send people to fight your war, they fight it their way. No restrictions, no rules of engagement from your council. They do what's necessary to win and come home alive. Velron hesitated. That was exactly what he was afraid of. But he also knew the council had no other options. Agreed. The decision was made public 2 days later. Earth would send 5,000 volunteers to fight the Kralith. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, over 50,000 soldiers had volunteered. They came from special forces units, intelligence agencies, and elite military groups around the world. Jake Morrison was training his team in Virginia when he got the call. He was a lieutenant colonel with 15 years of experience in some of the most dangerous operations Earth had ever conducted. He had fought terrorists in the Middle East, drug cartels in South America, and warlords in Africa. He had seen the worst that humanity could do to itself. Alien war? He said into his secure phone. You're joking. Not joking, his commander replied. They need volunteers. Special operations only. The mission is off-world, minimum 5 years, no rotation home, but they're offering technology that will change everything for Earth. Jake looked at his team running drills in the rain. These were men and women who had volunteered to go into the worst places on Earth and do the jobs nobody else could do. They were professionals, experts in violence, and they never quit. What kind of enemy are we facing? Jake asked. Something called the Kralith. They don't negotiate, don't surrender, and don't stop. The aliens who hired us have been losing for 6 months straight. Why us? Because we know how to win ugly. They've been fighting by rules. They need someone who knows how to break those rules. Jake smiled grimly. I'll ask my team, but I think you'll get your volunteers. He was right. Every single member of his unit volunteered. So did thousands of others from special operations units around the world. They were Delta Force operators, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, Army Rangers, intelligence operatives, and specialists from programs that officially didn't exist. They weren't parade ground soldiers. They were the people government sent when the situation was desperate and failure was not an option. They had operated in every hellhole on Earth, done things that would never appear in history books, and learned that survival meant doing whatever was necessary. Colonel. Lisa Grant looked at the assembled volunteers at the departure facility. She had spent 20 years in Marine Special Operations, leading teams into situations where one mistake meant death. She knew what kind of people stood before her. They asked for soldiers, she muttered to Jake. What are they getting? Jake asked. Lisa watched as the volunteers checked their weapons, packed their gear, and prepared for a war unlike anything they had ever faced. They're getting 5,000 people who know how to win. Whether the galaxy is ready for that or not, the transport ship arrived 3 days later. It was beautiful, all smooth curves and gleaming metal. It looked more like a work of art than a military vessel. The humans filed aboard with their equipment, carrying weapons that probably seemed primitive to the alien crew. Rifles, pistols, knives, grenades, and other tools of their trade. Captain Zorvan, ship's commander, greeted them formally. He was a tall reptilian creature with scales that shifted color in the light. Welcome, warriors of Earth. You honor us with your presence. A veteran named Paul Stevens looked around at the pristine corridors and the crew in their formal uniforms. He leaned close to his teammate, Kelly Brooks. This is going to be interesting. For who? Kelly asked. Everyone, Paul replied, as the ship lifted off from Earth, beginning the 3-week journey to the war zone. The humans started learning about their new employers. The galaxy fought wars with rules, they discovered. Rules about when you could attack, how you could attack, what weapons you could use. Rules about everything. Jake sat in a briefing room with Ambassador Velron and several council military advisors. They explained how civilized warfare worked. No firing on retreating enemies. No concealed positions. No surprise attacks. Everything announced and formal. The humans exchanged glances. "Let me make sure I understand," Jake said carefully. "The enemy doesn't follow any of these rules." "The Kralith have no concept of honor," Velron admitted. "And you still want us to follow them?" "They are what separate us from barbarism." Jake looked at his fellow humans. They all understood what was really happening here. The council was losing because they were too civilized to do what was necessary. The colony world of Terra 7 was dying from orbit. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the transport ship, watching the planet grow larger on the view screen. Even from space, he could see the damage. Smoke rose from burning cities. Massive craters marked where orbital strikes had hit, and spreading across the northern continent like a disease were the strange organic structures that the Kralith built. Captain Zorvan stood beside him, his reptilian features tense with worry. "The situation has gotten worse since we left Earth. The Kralith have landed in force. General Calith estimates 3 weeks before the capital falls." Jake studied the tactical display with experienced eyes. "How many defenders do we have?" 50,000 council troops. Mixed species, well-equipped, holding fortified positions. And the Kralith? Unknown. They come from underground tunnels. We estimate between 100,000 and 1 million. Paul Stevens, standing nearby, whistled quietly. "And we're 5,000. Ambassador Velron entered the bridge. 5,000 human soldiers are worth far more than their numbers. Your reputation for warfare is well known." Kelly Brooks was checking her rifle in the corner. She spoke without looking up. "Our reputation is from fighting other humans. This is different." "War is war," Velron said confidently. Jake caught Kelly's eye and saw his own doubts reflected there. War was never just war. Every conflict had its own rules, its own context. And from everything they had learned during the 3-week journey, the Council's rules were going to get people killed. The dropships descended through a sky filled with anti-aircraft fire. The humans sat in the troop compartments in full combat gear, feeling the familiar tension before a mission. But something was different this time. They had no satellite imagery, no intelligence briefing, no clear idea of what they were walking into. When the dropships landed at the council base outside the capital, the humans emerged into organized chaos. Alien soldiers from dozens of species rushed between positions. Supply columns moved with perfect precision. Everything was structured, orderly, and clearly not working. General Calith greeted them personally. He was massive, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 powerful arms and a chest covered in military decorations. His species was called the Vernai, and they were famous as warriors throughout the galaxy. "Welcome to Terra 7, Calith," said through his translator device. "We are honored to have Earth's finest warriors join us." Colonel Lisa Grant saluted. "General, we're ready to deploy." "What's the situation?" Calith gestured to a holographic map floating in the air. "The Kralith controlled the northern territories. We hold defensive lines here, here, and here. They attack at dawn and dusk with predictable patterns. We stop them, they withdraw, then the cycle repeats." "You're fighting a war of attrition," Jake observed. "Yes. Unfortunately, they have greater numbers. We need a breakthrough." Lisa studied the map carefully. "We need reconnaissance before committing forces. I want eyes on enemy positions, their tunnel networks, their supply routes." "Supply routes?" Calith's translator caught his confused tone. "The Kralith do not have supply routes. They consume everything in their path and keep moving forward." "Then we hit them where they live," Paul said. "Find their hive structures and destroy them." Calith's 4 arms moved in what looked like distress. That would require going deep behind enemy lines. Such tactics are considered dishonorable. We do not use assassins. The humans fell silent. Jake felt the weight of what they were facing settle on his shoulders. These aliens weren't just a different species. They fought a completely different kind of war. General Lisa said carefully, "On Earth we have a saying, all is fair in love and war. If the Kralith aren't following your rules, we can't afford to either. The Council has protocols, Kalith insisted. The Council is losing, Jake cut in. With respect, General, we didn't come here to watch your colonies fall. We came to win. Let us do our job. That night, Jake gathered his team leaders in a shelter away from the Council troops. 20 men and women crowded into the small space, all veterans of special operations, all wearing expressions that said they saw the same problems he did. Give me your assessments, Jake said simply. Captain Ryan Foster spoke first. He had spent 10 years in the Army Rangers before moving to more classified work. Their defensive positions are solid but static. No aggressive patrolling, no raids, no forward reconnaissance. They're waiting for the enemy to come to them. Major Nicole Hayes had worked in military intelligence for 15 years. Command and control is too centralized. Everything goes through General Kalith. Nobody takes initiative at lower levels. If the command post gets hit, the whole defense collapses. They're not adapting, Kelly added. The Kralith attack at dawn and dusk. Same pattern every day. That means the enemy knows it too. They're completely predictable. What about their weapons? Jake asked. Paul answered. Advanced but poorly used. They have energy weapons that could destroy a tank, but they use them like old rifles. No suppressive fire, no combined tactics. Everything is carefully aimed shots. Lisa had been listening quietly. They're fighting the war they want to fight, not the war they're in. That's going to get everyone killed unless we change things. So what do we do? Ryan asked. Jake looked at each of them. We show them how humans fight. Tomorrow night, we go hunting. The plan was simple, which made it revolutionary by Council standards. Jake would take 40 operators on a deep reconnaissance mission into Kralith territory. They would identify targets, map the tunnel networks, and if possible, destroy a hive structure. General Kalith objected strongly. This violates every principle of honorable combat. You will be operating without support, without backup, without formal military engagement. It is reckless. It's necessary, Jake countered. General, you've been fighting this war for 6 months and losing ground every day. Give us 1 week. If our methods don't work, we'll adapt to yours. Kalith's translator couldn't quite capture his reluctance, but he finally gave permission. The human platoon moved out at midnight. Slipping through the defensive perimeter like ghosts, they wore camouflage, carried weapons with silencers, and moved with a silence that disturbed the Council guards who watched them disappear into the darkness. For the humans, this was familiar territory. Not the actual landscape, which was alien and hostile, but the experience of operating behind enemy lines. They moved in a tactical formation perfected over decades of hard fighting, spread out, mutually supporting, ready to disappear if discovered. 3 hours into the patrol, they found their first KRAL. Kelly was on point when she raised her fist in the halt signal. Through her night vision device, she saw them. 6 creatures, each the size of a large dog, moving on 6 legs with insect-like coordination. They had armored plates that gleamed in the moonlight and jaws that looked capable of cutting through steel. Jake moved up beside her, studying the enemy through his own night vision. The Kralith moved in a straight line, showing no tactical awareness, no attempt at hiding. They didn't expect any resistance here. That was their first mistake. Jake signaled for an ambush. The humans moved into position with practiced efficiency. Creating a killing zone shaped like the letter L, they waited until the Kralith patrol entered the center of the trap. Then Kelly fired. The silenced gunfire was quieter than normal weapons, but the effect was devastating. All 6 Kralith went down in less than 3 seconds, hit by accurate fire from multiple angles. The humans held their positions for another minute, waiting for reinforcements or alarms that never came. Move, Jake whispered, and they continued forward. Over the next 8 hours, Jake's team went 12 miles into Kralith territory. They avoided contact when possible, eliminated small patrols when necessary, and documented everything with helmet cameras. What they found was both enlightening and terrifying. The Kralith weren't just invading, They were consuming everything. Every captured town had been stripped of all biological material. Buildings were melted down for raw materials. Even the soil looked dead. And everywhere the hive structures grew, massive organic towers that glowed with strange light patterns. As dawn approached, Jake called for withdrawal. They had their intelligence. They had identified 3 major hive structures within striking distance, and they had proven something important. Humans could operate in Kralith territory and survive. When they returned to the council base, General Kalith was waiting with his senior staff. "You lost 3 soldiers," he said immediately. "No casualties," Jake corrected him. "But our sensors detected weapons fire at 6 different locations. Those were Kralith casualties, General. 42 hostiles eliminated. 0 human losses." The council officers looked at each other in disbelief. That kind of ratio was impossible by their standards. "We have intelligence on enemy positions," Lisa added, connecting her data device to the holographic display. 3 hive structures, tunnel entrances, patrol patterns, and defensive weaknesses. We can hit them tomorrow night. "Wait," Kalith said. "You want to attack? Based on 1 night of reconnaissance?" "That's how we operate," Jake replied. "Fast, aggressive, adaptive. The Kralith think this territory is secure. We're going to prove them wrong." "This is not proper military procedure," one of Kalith's assistants objected. "You should report your findings." The assault on the first hive structure began at 2 in the morning. Under a moonless sky, 200 human operators moved through Kralith territory in a coordinated strike that would have been suicide by council standards. They traveled in 4 separate groups, each approaching the target from a different direction, timing their movements to hit at the exact same moment. There were no warning shots, no announcements, no formal declarations of battle. There was only violence, swift and brutal. Jake Morrison led the first group. 40 operators moving in near-perfect silence through the alien landscape. They had painted their faces dark colors, covered anything that might reflect light, and moved like predators through the darkness. The council observers assigned to his unit struggled to keep up, their armor and equipment making noise with every step. One observer, a Trell officer named Corvin, whispered urgently, "We should announce our presence. The rules of engagement require notification before an attack."
Ow.
Jake didn't slow down. The Kralith know we're at war. That's all the notification they need. But this is dishonorable. Attacking from hiding? Without warning. "It's effective," Jake cut him off. "Honor is great until it gets you killed. Watch and learn." The hive structure was massive. 50 meters tall and pulsing with that strange glow the Kralith seemed to produce naturally. Kralith moved in and out of multiple entrances, following patterns that might have been organized or might have been pure instinct. The humans had spent the previous day studying reconnaissance footage, identifying guard positions, patrol routes, and weak points in the structure. Now, they would exploit every single weakness. Kelly. Brooks was positioned on a ridge 800 meters from the target. She looked through her rifle scope at the Kralith guards. Beside her, another sniper counted them. 12 hostiles visible. Probably more inside. Probably hundreds more, Kelly agreed. "Which is why we're not going inside." She pressed her radio. "Overwatch in position. All targets marked." Jake's voice came back immediately. "Stand by." Assault teams moving to final positions. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. The human teams crept too within 100 meters of the hive, close enough to hear the chittering sounds of Kralith communication, close enough to smell the organic stench of the structure. They set up firing positions, placed explosives at key structural points, and prepared for the chaos that was about to begin. At exactly 2:30, Kelly fired the first shot. The Kralith guard's head exploded before it even knew it was under attack. 11 more shots followed in rapid succession as the other sniper teams engaged their targets. Then the assault teams opened fire with everything they had. The humans unleashed a storm of violence that left the pro-cells and observers frozen in shock. Automatic weapons fire cut down Kralith, emerging from the hive entrances. Grenade launchers sent explosives into weak points in the structure. The operators moved with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their sector of fire. Each team covering and advancing in smooth coordination. The Krathith responded as they always did. With overwhelming numbers and zero tactical thinking, they poured out of the hive by the dozens, then hundreds, rushing directly at the human positions. It was exactly what Jake had expected. "Light them up," he commanded. The humans had created a perfect killing zone. The Kralith funneled through narrow exits directly into overlapping fields of fire. Those that made it past the initial barrage ran into prepared positions where operators fired with cold precision. The aliens were fast, armored, and deadly at close range, but they weren't soldiers. They were animals following instinct, and the humans had spent thousands of years learning to hunt animals. Within 5 minutes, over 300 Kralith lay dead outside the hive. The humans had 2 wounded, both from ricochets. Jake ordered the assault teams to pull back while the demolition specialists finished planting charges throughout the structure. As the last human team retreated to a safe distance, Jake pressed the detonator. The explosions tore through the hive from the inside, collapsing the organic structure in a cascade of fire and debris. Secondary explosions followed as volatile biological compounds ignited. Within minutes, the entire structure was burning. The Kralith inside were dead or dying. Korvan, the Trell observer, stared at the destruction with something close to horror. "You killed them all. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Without mercy? That's war," Jake replied flatly. "The real kind, not the civilized version you've been playing." "But the loss of life would have been ours if we'd fought by your rules," Kelly interrupted, joining them. "Every Kralith in that hive would have kept pushing toward the capital, killing everyone in their path. Now they're dead, and we're not. Simple math." The 3 other assault groups reported similar results. 4 hive structures destroyed, estimated Kralith casualties in the thousands. Human losses limited to 6 wounded and 0 dead. By any military standard, it was a stunning success. By council standards, it was barbarism. Back at base, General Calith called an emergency meeting with his staff and the human commanders. The holographic display showed real-time updates from orbit. The Kralith were in chaos. Their northern advance stopped as they tried to understand what had happened. "Your tactics are effective," Calith admitted, his translator struggling with his conflicted emotions. "But they are also ruthless. You showed no mercy, took no prisoners, gave no quarter. This is not how civilized species fight wars." Colonel Lisa Grant met his gaze steadily. "General, civilized species are losing this war. We're here to change that. If our methods bother you, remember we're doing this so your civilians don't have to." "Council will not approve of these tactics," one of Calith's aides insisted. "There will be inquiries, investigations. You may face charges of war crimes." Paul Stevens laughed, a harsh sound. "War crimes? We just saved your colony. In a week, we've done more than your forces did in 6 months. And you want to put us on trial?" "The galaxy has standards," the aide replied stiffly. "Then the galaxy can come down here and fight by those standards?" Jake snapped. "We'll pack up and go home. See how long your colony lasts." The threat hung in the air. Everyone knew it wasn't empty. The humans could leave, and the Kralith would overrun Terra 7 within a month. The Council's standards meant nothing to an enemy that didn't acknowledge them. General Calith raised one of his 4 hands, calling for silence. "Enough. The humans have proven their effectiveness. We will continue operations as planned. But I must report these events to the Council. They will make the final decision on whether Earth's warriors remain in the fight." Over the next 2 weeks, the humans launched raid after raid into Kralith territory. They perfected their tactics, learning enemy patterns, and exploiting every weakness. They destroyed hive structures, collapsed tunnel networks, and eliminated Kralith by the thousands. And with each operation, more Council observers watched in fascinated horror. As Earth soldiers demonstrated what unrestricted warfare looked like, they used ambushes, attacking from hiding and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. They set traps, leaving explosives along Kralith approach routes. They conducted assassinations, eliminating what passed for Kralith leadership. They fought dirty, mean, and without apology, and they won the Kralith. For all their numbers and ferocity, had no answer for human tactics. They couldn't adapt because adaptation required thinking, and the Kralith operated on instinct. They couldn't anticipate because the humans never repeated the same approach twice. They couldn't even counterattack effectively because the humans were never where the Kralith expected them to be. Major Nicole Hayes, leading a reconnaissance unit deep in enemy territory, explained it during a briefing. They're predictable because they're not really thinking. They're following programmed responses. Once you understand the program, they're manageable. Manageable. Corvin, who had been assigned as her permanent observer, objected. They nearly overran my position twice. Because you stood in place and fought them head-on? Nicole replied. We don't do that. We move, shoot, and relocate. By the time they figure out where we were, we're already hitting them from somewhere else. But it wasn't just tactics that gave humans the advantage. It was mindset. The Council soldiers, even the best of them, carried assumptions about proper warfare that limited their effectiveness. They announced attacks, gave warnings, followed protocols that made sense in conflicts between civilized species. The humans had learned long ago that survival meant abandoning those niceties. They had fought wars where enemies used human shields, hid among civilians, and employed suicide tactics. They had faced insurgents who didn't wear uniforms, terrorists who targeted non-combatants, and criminals who corrupted everything they touched. They had learned to fight not just soldiers, but organized violence in all its forms, against the Kralith. Those hard lessons translated into overwhelming effectiveness. 3 weeks after the first hive assault, the tide of battle had turned completely. The Kralith still held territory, but they were no longer advancing. Their numbers were declining. Hive structures across the northern continent burned as human strike teams worked through them systematically. The capital was no longer under threat, and then the council made its decision. Ambassador Velrin arrived on T. Finally, Jake spoke into the heavy silence. Ambassador, with respect, you're asking the wrong question. Good. This isn't about choosing between your principles and our methods. It's about understanding that we're fighting two different wars, explained Velron said. You're fighting a war between civilized species where both sides acknowledge rules and limitations. We're fighting a war of survival where the only rule is to win and go home alive. The Kralith aren't a civilized species. They don't care about your conventions. They just want to consume everything in their path. Jake gestured to the displays showing Kralith-occupied territory. Can't negotiate with them. Can't reason with them. Can't make them understand anything. You can only stop them. Stopping them requires the kind of warfare that makes you uncomfortable. That's what you hired us for, whether you realized it or not. We wanted soldiers, Velrin said quietly. No, Lisa Grant corrected. You wanted executioners. You wanted someone to do the dirty work while you kept your hands clean. We're very good at dirty work. But don't pretend you didn't know what you were asking for. The council delegation talked among themselves in musical tones. The tension in the room was thick. Every human present knew that their future, and possibly Earth's relationship with the galaxy, hung in the balance. After what felt like forever, Velrin turned back to the humans. The council has reached a decision. You will continue your operations against the Kralith. However, there will be conditions. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Here it came. First, you will accept council oversight. Each operation will be reviewed for basic humanitarian standards. Second, you will train council forces in your tactics, but in a way that preserves dignity in warfare. And third, you will acknowledge that your methods are temporary. Once the Kralith threat is eliminated, we expect Earth's warriors to adopt Council's standards of combat. It was as bad as Jake had feared. Oversight meant delays and interference. Training meant compromising what made them effective. And adopting Council standards meant giving up humanity's greatest advantage. But before he could respond, General Callith spoke up. I object to these conditions. Every head turned toward the four-armed general. Even Velrin looked surprised. You object? Velrin repeated. Yes. For 6 months I watched this colony die by degrees, helpless to stop it, because our tactics were inadequate. Then these humans arrived, and in 3 weeks, they accomplished what I could not achieve in half a year. They are crude, brutal, and frightening. They are also the most effective soldiers I have ever seen. Kaleth's translator struggled to convey the emotion in his voice. If we restrict them with oversight and limitations, we remove the very qualities that make them successful. We might as well send them home. If we do that, the Kraith will eventually win. Not just here, but everywhere. Because we are not willing to do what is necessary to defeat them. What are you suggesting? Velrin asked. Give them complete operational freedom. Let them fight their war the way they know how. Yes, it will be ugly. Yes, it will challenge our values. But better to question our values in a living galaxy than to die with them in a dead one. The chamber erupted in debate. Council officials argued with military leaders. Species representatives shouted at each other in dozens of languages. The humans stood silent, watching their fate being decided by beings who couldn't agree whether survival justified compromise. Finally, Velrin's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. We'll vote on this matter. The vote was close. Several species voted to send the humans home, unwilling to support their methods. Others voted for strict oversight, but a slim majority, influenced by General Kaleth's words and the reality of the Kralith threat, voted for operational freedom. The Council has decided, Velron announced. Earth's warriors will continue operations against the Kralith with full tactical independence. May our ancestors forgive us. As the Council delegation left, Jake found himself standing with Kaleth on an observation deck, looking out at the city that had almost fallen. You realize what you just did? Jake asked. He gave us permission to fight without limits. That's going to get messy. I know, Kaleth replied, but I have learned something from watching your species fight. You humans understand a truth that we have forgotten. Sometimes the only way to preserve civilization is to use uncivilized means. You are not proud of your methods, but you use them because they work. Does that make it right? Jake asked. I do not know, Kaleth admitted. But I know that being right means nothing if everyone is dead. With the Council's approval, the human operations expanded. More volunteers arrived from Earth, bringing the total force to 10,000. They spread across 3 colony worlds, hunting down Kralith wherever they found them. The aliens learned to fear the humans in ways they had never feared Council forces. The Kralith began to change their behavior. They stopped using predictable attack patterns, withdrew from exposed positions. They even started setting crude traps. It wasn't intelligence exactly, more like evolutionary adaptation happening in real time. But it showed that the Kralith could learn. Colonel Lisa Grant was briefing her commanders when the reports came in. They're adapting faster than we expected. The hive structures are going deeper underground. They're abandoning surface positions and focusing on tunnel warfare. Then we go into the tunnels, Paul Stevens said. That's suicide, Corvin protested. He had become a permanent liaison between human forces and the Council military. The tunnels are their territory. They know every passage, every chamber. You would be walking into a death trap. Maybe Jake acknowledged, but we can't let them dig in. If they establish a strong underground presence, this war gets a lot harder. Captain Ryan Foster had an idea. What if we don't go in after them? What if we bring the tunnels down on their heads? Nicole Hayes caught on immediately. Seismic charges. We map the tunnel networks from the surface, identify key support structures, and collapse the whole system. That would bury thousands of Kralith alive, Corvin said, his voice shocked. Yes, Lisa replied simply. That's the point. The Council observers who accompanied the operation would later describe it as the most coldly efficient military action they had ever witnessed. Human engineers spent 2 weeks mapping tunnel networks across an entire region using ground-penetrating sensors. They identified critical junctions, load-bearing chambers, and central hive complexes. Then they placed charges at precisely calculated points across 50 square kilometers. When the charges detonated, the effect was catastrophic. Entire tunnel networks collapsed in a cascading failure. Hive structures on the surface crumbled as their underground supports gave way. An estimated 50,000 Kralith died in less than an hour, buried under tons of rock and earth. It was the single deadliest operation of the war. It changed everything. The Kraith began to retreat, not just tactically but strategically. They abandoned colonies they had occupied for months. They pulled back from contested territories. For the first time since the war began, they were acting defensively. But the humans didn't let up. They pursued the retreating Kralith, destroying hive structures, collapsing tunnels, and eliminating every cluster they found. It was relentless, brutal, and effective. Within 3 months, 5 colony worlds had been liberated. The Kralith presence in council space was reduced by 70%. The galaxy watched in a mixture of awe and horror. News of the human operations spread to every species in the council. Some praised Earth's warriors as saviors, others condemned them as monsters. But everyone agreed on one thing: humans knew how to win wars. Not everyone in the council military approved of human methods, but they couldn't argue with results. Officers from dozens of species requested permission to train with human forces. They wanted to learn these brutal tactics to understand how such a primitive species could be so devastatingly effective. General Calith established a formal training program. Human operators taught council soldiers about small unit tactics. It's about moving and shooting, about using terrain and surprise to maximum advantage. But they quickly discovered a problem. Most council species couldn't think like humans. It wasn't about intelligence or capability. It was about mindset. Council soldiers had been trained for thousands of years to fight honorably, to follow rules, to wage war as a civilized endeavor. Asking them to abandon those principles was like asking them to become different people. Kelly Brooks was instructing a class of Trell soldiers in ambush tactics when one of them asked a question that stopped her cold. But if we hide and attack, without warning, how will the enemy know they have been defeated honorably? Kelly stared at him. They won't know anything. They'll be dead. But death without honor is meaningless. A warrior must know they fell to a worthy opponent. A warrior who thinks like that is going to fall to someone who doesn't care about honor, Kelly replied. War isn't about honor. It's about survival. The Trell soldier looked genuinely distressed. If we abandon honor, what separates us from the enemy? Kelly had no answer for that. She reported the conversation to Lisa Grant that evening. They don't get it, Kelly said. They literally cannot understand fighting without honor. It's not in their nature. Then we fight this war for them, Lisa replied. 6 months into the war, the Kralith made their final stand. Intelligence reports showed massive troop movements converging on a world called Vaxis Prime. It was an uninhabited planet on the edge of council space, but it held strategic importance. The Kraliths were building something there, something big. Orbital scans showed dozens of massive hive structures. It's connected by underground networks that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. It looked like a fortress, or a nest. Maybe both. Ambassador Velron called an emergency war council. Representatives from every species gathered, along with the human command staff. The holographic display showed Vox's Prime rotating slowly, marked with hundreds of red indicators showing Kralith positions. We estimate between 500,000 and 1 million Kralith on that world, Velron said. They have been gathering there for weeks. Our analysts believe they are preparing for a massive counteroffensive. If they launch from Vaxis Prime, they could strike at a dozen colony worlds simultaneously. Then we hit them first, Jake said. We take Vaxis Prime and crush their staging ground. With what forces? A council general asked. We would need hundreds of thousands of troops. The logistics alone would take months to organize. We have 10,000 human operators, Lisa Grant said. And we don't need months. We need 2 weeks to plan and stage. Council representatives erupted in protest. 10,000 against 1 million? It was insane. Suicide. Impossible. General Calith raised his hand for silence. Let them speak. Lisa activated her own tactical display. We're not going to fight them head-on. That would be stupid. Instead, we identify the central hive complex. The biggest structure, the one everything else connects to. We go in with a strike force, plant nuclear devices at key structural points, and collapse the entire network. Nuclear weapons? Velryn's voice was shocked. Such weapons are banned by council law. They are considered too destructive, too indiscriminate. They're also effective, Paul Stevens added. One strike, properly placed, takes out the entire Kralith presence. No prolonged battle, no months of fighting. Quick, clean, decisive. There's nothing clean about nuclear weapons, a council representative protested. There's nothing clean about war, Jake replied. You want clean? Find another species to fight your battles. We do what works. Ack! The argument went on for hours. The council was deeply uncomfortable with the idea of using nuclear weapons. They had banned such weapons thousands of years ago, considering them too horrific for civilized warfare. But they were also facing the reality that conventional methods weren't working fast enough. Finally, General Calith made the deciding argument. If we do not stop the Kralith on Vaxis Prime, they will attack our colonies. Millions of civilians will die. We can debate morality and principles, or we can save lives. I choose to save lives. The vote was closer than before, but it passed. The human forces prepared for the largest operation of the war. They studied every detail of Vaxis Prime. They analyzed orbital imagery, mapped underground networks, and identified the central hive complex. It was enormous, larger than any structure they had seen before. Sitting at the center of a web of tunnels that connected to every other hive on the planet, the plan was complex but straightforward. A diversionary force of 2,000 humans would attack the outer hive structures, drawing Kraith forces away from the center. Meanwhile, a strike team of 500 would infiltrate the central complex, fight their way to the core, plant the nuclear devices, and extract before detonation. It was dangerous. The strike team would be deep in enemy territory with limited support and no backup. But it was the only way. Jake volunteered to lead the strike team. So did Lisa, Paul, Kelly, Ryan, Nicole, and most of the original operators who had landed on Terra 7 6 months ago. They had started this war together. They would finish it together. The assault began at dawn. The diversionary force hit 3 outer hive structures simultaneously, launching the most aggressive attack the humans had conducted yet. They didn't try to be subtle or clever. They just attacked with overwhelming firepower, drawing every Kralith in the area toward them. The distraction worked. Thousands of Kralith poured out of the central complex to reinforce the outer positions. That's when Jake's strike team made their move. They came in low and fast in stealth transport ships, landing 3 kilometers from the central hive. 500 operators, carrying enough explosives and firepower to level a city, moved toward their target through terrain that looked like something from a nightmare. The ground was covered in organic growth. Strange structures jutted from the earth. The air itself seemed thick and hostile, but the humans pushed forward, moving in tactical formation, weapons ready. Every sense alert for danger. They encountered the first Kralith guards 1 kilometer from the target. Kelly took them down with precise sniper fire before they could raise an alarm. The team kept moving. As they got closer to the central hive, resistance increased. Kralith patrols became more frequent. The humans fought through them, using speed and aggression to overwhelm any opposition before it could organize. They left a trail of dead Kralith behind them, but they couldn't afford to slow down. The central hive was a monstrosity. It rose from the ground like a twisted tower, 50 stories tall and pulsing with that eerie bioluminescence. Entrances dotted its surface at multiple levels. Kralith moved in and out in massive numbers. There's too many, Corvin said. He had insisted on coming with the strike team, wanting to witness what might be the final battle of the war. We cannot fight through all of them. We're not going to, Jake replied. He pointed to a large entrance on the ground level. We breach there, move fast, get to the core chamber, plant the devices, and get out. Speed is everything. If we slow down, we die. The breaching charges blew the entrance open with a thunderous explosion. The strike team poured into the hive, weapons firing, moving through organic corridors that seemed to pulse with life. Kralith appeared from everywhere, and the humans cut them down without mercy. It was chaos. Close quarters combat in alien territory against an enemy that knew every passage. The humans moved as a unit, covering each other, advancing relentlessly toward the core. They lost people. Operators fell to Kralith claws and mandibles, but the team kept pushing forward. Nicole Hayes was hit first, a Kralith tearing through her armor. Paul Stevens dragged her to cover while Kelly and Ryan provided suppressing fire. Ryan took a hit next, his leg nearly severed. He propped himself against a wall and kept firing, buying time for the others to advance. "Keep moving," Ryan shouted. "Don't stop for me." She wanted to argue, wanted to pull everyone back and find another way. But there was no other way. This was it. The final push. They either completed the mission or they died trying. The core chamber was massive. A cathedral of organic architecture with the central hive structure rising from the floor like a grotesque pillar. It pulsed with energy, and Jake could feel it in his bones. This was the heart of the Kralith presence on Vaxis Prime. Destroy this, and everything else would collapse. "Plant the charges," Jake ordered. The demolition specialists moved with practiced efficiency, placing nuclear devices at structural points around the chamber. Each device was small but powerful, designed to create a cascading reaction that would destroy the hive from the inside. As they worked, more Kralith poured into the chamber. The humans formed a defensive perimeter, fighting desperately to hold them back. The noise was deafening. Gunfire, explosions, the chittering screams of dying Kralith, the shouts of human soldiers. "Charges planted," the demo team leader called out. "Timer set for 15 minutes. Everyone out," Jake commanded. "Move, move, move." Yeah. The retreat was even more chaotic than the assault. The Kralith seemed to sense what was happening, throwing everything they had at the humans. The strike team fought their way back through corridors, now filled with enemies. They lost more people. Good soldiers. Brave men and women who had volunteered to save a galaxy that barely appreciated them. Jake was the last one out of the hive, firing his rifle dry as he backed toward the exit. Kelly grabbed his arm and pulled him through the entrance just as a massive Kralith lunged at him. Paul threw a grenade back into the entrance and they ran. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away. The strike team, now reduced to 300 survivors, ran through the alien landscape as fast as they could. Behind them, alarms seemed to be sounding throughout the hive structures. The Kraith knew. Something was wrong. They made it 1.5 kilometers when the timer hit 0. The explosion was visible from orbit. The nuclear devices detonated simultaneously, unleashing energy that tore through the central hive and into the tunnel network below. The ground shook violently. The massive hive structure collapsed in on itself. Then the cascading reaction began, one by one. Every hive structure connected to the central complex exploded as the tunnel networks collapsed. The destruction spread outward like a wave, consuming everything in its path. Within minutes, the entire Kralith presence on Vaxis Prime was gone, replaced by a smoking crater that stretched for dozens of kilometers. The surviving humans watched from their extraction ships as the planet burned below them. They had won.